Everyone, welcome. I'm really excited. I had such a great time last year participating as a panelist with Echo Idaho. And I'm really excited about today's presentation. I'm sorry Amy can't be here, but she's fantastic and you'll get to meet her throughout the year. I'm most excited about the content today because we're really looking at preventing challenging behavior, not just reacting to it, but that prevention, that proactive mode. And we're looking at it from a systems perspective. So everyone who's attending today, we all kind of reside in a different system. So really think about how these different components or evidence-based practices could kind of come into play within your system. And then also how you can use some of these individually, and then how you can collaborate and align vertically and horizontally with your colleagues on these. So again, today we're just talking about school-wide strategies to prevent challenging behavior. And there's Amy. So again, you'll get to meet her throughout the different sessions. All right, so this is what Lindsay mentioned in her presentation. This is kind of what we're after for the first session, which is today, all the way through May. So we're going to be looking today again at those school-wide behavioral strategies. We're going to really focus on preventative approaches. In October, Dr. Woody and I will be talking about clarifying roles and responsibilities within that system that you're building. We'll be talking about competing behavioral pathways, social media, and mental health. That comes in May with Casey. FBA, the educator's role, common mental health diagnosis, the BIP, the behavior intervention plan, caregiver involvement and collaboration, crisis plan development, law and safety, and then accommodation, so IEP or a 504 plan. And then also, what are some of those side effects from medications that some of your students may be taking? So that's kind of what we're after for the whole year. And we're excited not only to present that content, but also to look at those case studies. Okay. Here are our objectives for this session. So again, we are looking at those school-wide strategies to preventing challenging behaviors, and those kind of get drilled down into 6 components. So thinking about a school-wide leadership team, is there a leadership team within your system that really drives this work? Are there school-wide behavioral expectations? And beyond that, is there explicit instruction of those school-wide expectations? Are we acknowledging, looking for, and acknowledging positive behaviors? And then how are we responding? What are the adult responses? Are they consistent and predictable? And then are we using valid and reliable data for decision making? So that's what we're going to cover today. I want everyone to take a minute and think about this. Again, we're all coming at this from a different perspective, but if you could add your thoughts to the chat box here, why should we focus on a school-wide approach in preventing challenging behavior rather than just kind of an individual approach? So I'd love to hear your thoughts. So why should we focus on a school-wide approach in preventing challenging behavior? And we'll just kind of wait for some of those to populate in the chat box. Great answers here. I see some of you are driving, so we'll read some of these out loud to you. To support and meet the needs of all students, it allows for everyone to be on the same page, working towards the same goal. Consistency supports and reinforces positive change. Normalizing reinforcement of positive behavior for everyone works. Working together as a school to meet the needs of students. Promote coordination and collaboration. Best use of resources. So Mark, you're excited to hear what school-wide means. And so I'm going to provide a lot of examples on that. Keep adding, everybody check out those thoughts in the chat box, but we're really focused again on that school-wide systematic approach. And that leads us right into something we talked about in last year's session, a multi-tiered system of support. So we want to be very effective and efficient with our time and resources because we never have enough of either one of those. So we want to think about what are we doing for all students, and that's on the academic side, the behavioral side, because we know chicken and egg crosses the line together. So those go hand in hand. So what are we doing for all kids? That's in that green zone. If we're effective, we're reaching or meeting 80 to 90% of our students' needs. We do know that we'll have some students that need a little bit more. That comes in the way of tier 2 or that yellow zone, but that should only be 5 to 10% of our student population. And those supports, both academic and on the behavior behavior side should come in the way of small group, whereas that red zone, only 1 to 5% of our students should need those individualized intensive support. So think about where your school, your system is as far as creating effective and efficient systems for all kids, for some kids in the way of small group, and then for a few kids where we're individualizing supports. I'm not going to read this, but when I think of a school-wide system to prevent challenging behavior or to promote positive behavior, I always think about positive behavioral interventions and supports, PBIS. I'll give you a second to read this, but I love this definition, and I find it interesting that this is the definition that comes to us from the National Center for School Mental Health at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. So those folks who are really rooted in student well-being and mental health do a great job of describing and defining PBIS. So I'll give you a second here. So obviously a few things pop out to me and they're bolded there, but really that system's change. So this isn't, when we're thinking about a school-wide approach, it's not buying a packaged curriculum or a program. It's really how are we creating the climate and culture for our school, and what are the activities and interventions that we're using. When we are talking specific to positive behavior interventions and supports, we know that schools that are implementing PBIS with fidelity, so all of the necessary elements are in play, they really reach some great outcomes. So you can see here that PBIS has been researched over and over and over again. We see improved student outcomes, reduction in exclusionary discipline practices, and then improved teacher outcomes. So I always like investing in something that's also helpful for the staff as well. This is our goal with this preventative approach. It's really to create an equitable learning environment for all kids, all meaning all. And we do that through creating systems that are predictable, consistent, positive, and safe. So those are all kind of like gears that work together: predictable, consistent, positive, and safe. Think about how those play out when we talk about these 6 items. So today we're focused on what are we doing for all kids, and thinking through that, we want to teach appropriate behavior to all students. We want to intervene early. We want to use research-based interventions, and we want to monitor student progress. So plan, do, check, act, and we're going to collect and use data to make our decisions. These are the 6 elements that I mentioned in our objectives. So we'll just get started with the first one, school-wide leadership team. So the reason behind a school-wide leadership team is really to increase effective behavior management knowledge and strategies, support staff in delivering those interventions as they're intended to be delivered, to improve student outcomes, to sustain and scale up interventions over time and across staff, create effective data systems where valid and reliable data is collected and also used, not just collected to be collected, and to ensure continuous improvement of fidelity in student outcomes. So think about the system or the school you reside in. Is there a leadership team, a team that really focuses in on creating a system of proactive and preventative behavioral interventions? I love this slide. This is kind of the why. So why focus on school level teams? Why is a team important? And this comes to us from Fixon and Blase and colleagues, and they've researched implementation science over and over again. And what they found, if there's not an actual team that's coming together to make this happen for the larger system, you're going to get to about 14% implementation fidelity in 17 years. So think about all of the times you've been sent to a conference or a course or a workshop by yourself with the objective of bringing it back to your team to make it happen. We could probably all raise our hand. It usually doesn't go very far. And the science tells us it goes to about 14% implementation fidelity. But if we do have that team, we can really make it happen. And typically we see an implementation fidelity at 80% or above just in 3 years. And then thinking through that team, we need some definite kind of pillars in place to make change happen. So we need vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan to create that change. So if we're missing the vision, it typically leads us to confusion. If we lack the skills necessary to make the change, it leads to anxiety. And we've probably all been a part of all of these different line items here. If we're lacking the incentives, we're going to feel some resistance from ourselves, maybe from our colleagues. If we're lacking the necessary resources, it leads to frustration. And if we're lacking an action plan, there's just going to be a whole bunch of false starts. So if you've worked with a team to try to make a behavior plan or behavior framework happen and it hasn't gone very far, refer back to this slide. Maybe there was an element that was missing. And then this just leads to our different stages of implementation. So all of us have been a part of an implementation strategy, whether it's a new reading curriculum or positive behavior supports. Just think through, where is your current system at? Are you in that exploration, adoption phase, that installation phase, initial implementation, elaboration, or are we always working to regenerate? And this is not a straight line continuum here. A lot of times we'll move forward and then move a couple steps back, but the goal is to get down to that blue where we are always still working on creating that system. Now let's get into school-wide expectations. So if you have school-wide expectations, just go ahead and post that in the chat. I'm interested to find out at the end of the session. But school-wide expectations are beyond just rules. So we want to invest in prevention. We know we do this through defining behavioral expectations, teaching those expectations, monitoring and rewarding when we see those expectations met or appropriate behavior, when providing corrective consequences for behavioral errors, and information-based problem solving. Remember, don't expect school-wide efforts to affect or meet the needs of kids with chronic problem behavior or needs that go beyond just that green zone tier 1. So we're thinking about what we're doing school-wide, but there will always be some students that need a little bit more and some students that need a whole lot more. When we're creating our school-wide expectations, and we can kind of use this as a rubric for those expectations that are being added to the chat box, there should only be 3 to 5. And I spend most of my days in schools talking to staff, talking to students, talking to stakeholders. If I go into a school where there are more than 5 expectations, typically we remember a partial amount. So that's kind of the threshold. We only want 3 to 5. They need to be broad enough to cover academic and behavioral goals. They should be stated positively. So that's a little bit different. That's that's kind of a shift in mindset for some. It's not what we don't want to see, it's what we do want to see. So instead of, no running, it's walk appropriately down the halls. These should also be brief and easy to remember. And this is where we can have fun. This is where we can make them catchy and personalized to our specific system. Here's some examples. So thank you, Notice School District, for sharing these. They have the same behavioral expectations K through 12. They're a small rural district in Idaho. They have an elementary school and a junior or a junior senior high, and they continue those K-12, but they make them age appropriate. So the pictures seen here, these are at the high school. They're the Pirates. So their expectations are respect, responsibility, resilience, and readiness. And they are everywhere. The kids know them, the staff know them, and now the community members know them. And then this is that same set of expectations at the elementary level. So R, and notice there's 4 R's there because they have 4 R's in their expectations. That's their pirate pledge that they say every day. Walking around at the elementary school, all elementary kids know what this means. It's not just that they're, memorizing it to memorizing it. They're memorizing it to live it. So with expectations, it's not enough just to have those great posters. We need to actually explicitly teach expectations just like we do any of our curriculum content. And this is a great reminder. If it's a won't do, that's one issue. But if it's a can't do, we really need to think about repetition. So behaviors are prerequisites for academics, procedures and routines create structure, and repetition is key to learning new skills. So Lindsay, I think there's 2 bullet points that pop up here. So for a child to learn something new, and this comes to us from Harry Wong, it needs to be repeated on average of 8 times. So how many times do we expose kids to new information and we think they should get it? They're still in that can't do zone. Now, for a student to unlearn an old behavior and replace it with a new behavior, that new behavior must be repeated on average of 28 times. So it takes a lot of explicit teaching. Just like Anita Archer would say, it's that, I do, we do, we do, we do, you do. There's a big difference between proactive and reactive. So we definitely want to stay on that proactive side where youth are provided with support to ensure they perform the expected behavior. There's opportunities for practice, there's clear feedback, there's reteaching. Whereas on the reactive side, it's repeatedly stating to youth what he or she is doing wrong without giving them corrective feedback. So a lot of times when we see challenging behavior, it's actually a skill deficit. So if we have a student that struggles, let's say in reading, we wouldn't just send them to the corner. We would work on those skills. So how often do we work on those skills with behavior? Here's an example of taking those expectations a step above and beyond. So this is Glens Ferry School District. They're very similar to Notice School District, where there's an elementary school and then a secondary school. And they really work to think about K-12, what are our expectations? And they've used these in every kind of element of campus and beyond. So respect, responsibility, commitment, and integrity. You can see those right when you walk through the front doors. And then this is their behavior matrix. So thinking again, system-wide, school-wide. So you can see their expectations are down that left-hand column there: respect, responsibility, commitment, and integrity. And then they really divided out, okay, what does our school look like? What are the different locations? And what does it mean to be respectful, to have responsibility, commitment, and integrity in each one of those locations? So we can see here, bathroom, foyer, they're a little hard to read, hallway, and I'll show you some. Let's go to the next slide. So here's what they look like taking each column, and they've worked with a really great sign company locally to create these. So parking lot expectations, here's what it means to follow those 4 expectations. Playground expectations, those are posted on the playground. And then I love this one, spectator expectations. So if they're having a theater event, something on the football field, in the gym, everybody is following these same expectations, all meaning all. Now let's get into acknowledging positive behavior. So let's say that we've created our school-wide expectations and we've taught those. Now it's really important to look for those behaviors. And this all really boils down to relationships. So really think about within your system, what are the different current relationships? What are the staff to student relationships? What are the staff to staff relationships, staff to families, student to student? Now, there's not a hierarchy here, but I will point out that second one, that staff to staff, those relationships, staff, the adults are modeling what's appropriate and what's inappropriate at a school. So staff to staff interactions really set the climate and culture of your system. So with an acknowledgement system, this can look many different ways. You may have a ticket system. You may not want to do any kind of economy process, whatever fits your context. But think about why. It's to reinforce school rules, your behavioral expectations, and positive behavior. That's our goal. To promote busy adults to remember to reinforce positive behavior. So if there's not a school-wide system in place, this is the first thing we let go of. When we get tired, when we get stressed out, we forget to acknowledge and look for really great behavior. If there's a system in place, it keeps us honest. It also increases positive interactions between and with staff and students, and it promotes a more positive school environment. I'm not going to read through all of these, but when we're thinking about creating a reinforcement acknowledgement system, whatever you want to call it, it is the opposite of bribery. So if you feel students are like, hey, Miss Katie, I picked up a piece of trash. Can I have a ticket? That's where things have gone wrong. What we're trying to create are positive interactions. We also need to remember that that earned equals kept. So we're really trying to make students accountable and responsible for their own behavior and what it leads to. So if we have a student that does something great, they're probably going to get a positive consequence. If they do something that's inappropriate or challenging, there would be a consequence that fits that. But we're not taking something away that was once given. This comes to us from our pirates from Notice School District, and this is at the elementary level, and they're very explicit. So they give away these I Spy cards at the elementary level, and they go nuts for these things. And then they use these cards in different ways. But it's all about the relationship behind the card. So students can also give these cards to each other. We've seen community members also pass these out. The adult would circle what expectation is being met or exceeded. And then we're able to track who's receiving these and who's also looking for that good behavior, who's distributing. Getting into consistent and predictable consequences. So we need that system in place to acknowledge positive behavior. We also need a system in place for when behavior gets challenging or inappropriate. And these are clicks, Lindsay. So the questions we're asking are so important. So why are these kids so out of control? I'm going to hear this a handful of times every year. I'm also going to hear maybe we should revamp our system. Is there a new program out there we can buy? That's like nails on a chalkboard to me. And then why is punishment not working? So if you'll give that first one a click. So instead of asking that initial question, let's ask what in our environment and culture supports positive behavior. I worked with a very large high school and they were having attendance issues and they just couldn't figure out why are kids not showing up? We've told them, we've laid down the law, they know the rules, they know the consequences. And instead we flipped that question and really asked ourselves, what are we doing to make kids want to show up to school? Instead of should we revamp our system? Is there a new program out there? What are some small changes we can make for a big return? So leveraging what's going well and then making a few tweaks to get those outcomes we're really looking for. And then why is punishment not working? My favorite, how can I respond so the behavior is less likely to occur in the future? Okay, so what is our response to it? How are we changing that? And ideally, we want to focus our time individually and as a school-wide effort. We want to focus 80% or more of our time on being proactive and preventative. And then we want to only spend 20% or less of our time on reacting, or what I like to call putting out fires. So think about the time and effort that you spend on prevention and the time and effort you spend on reacting. When we're thinking about the school-wide approach, think about restructuring the environment, establishing predictable routines and procedures, and changing our responses so the adults are more consistent. And then this visual was shared with me. An elementary principal shared this. So children often present behaviors that look like the shark, but if we look below the water, we realize they are really just a scared goldfish trying to have a need met. Their behaviors might communicate anger, hostility, but below the surface is fear in a hurting child. It is our job as teachers and parents to stop teaching and parenting the shark fin and to look below the surface and meet the needs of the goldfish. So when we're in this kind of component of thinking about responding to inappropriate behavior, let's get a real clear image of what is happening and what is our behavior trying to communicate. We all know behavior serves a function, and we dove into this last year, and there's a lot more information coming your way as far as the function of behavior. But just a reminder, problem behavior meets a need. Also, it has a history of paying off. So it probably works for them, probably in the home. So that's why they're bringing it to school. And at times, the payoff is more valuable than the punishment. So we've told these kids the rules. They know what's going to happen to them, but it's still worth it in their eyes. And efficient and effective behaviors will continue to occur unless we teach behaviors that match that function. So, how can we teach them explicitly a more appropriate way to have their needs met? And again, repetition, repetition, repetition. So, thinking through a school-wide system, we want to be consistent and predictable with our responses and consequences. Clearly defined procedures support consistency with responding to behavioral infractions. Consistency creates conditions for increased structure, feelings of safety, which are so important in a positive learning environment. We know that consistency is key. So think about just mentally, you don't have to add it to your chat box, but how consistent are you with your colleagues as a group? How consistently are you responding? It's less important what the consequence is than that something is consistently done. If there is no response, that's usually a stamp of approval that it's okay. How staff respond or what consequence is used is less important than the certainty that something will be done, even something relatively as brief as like a redirection, reteaching, proximity. And then we want to remember responses to inappropriate behavior should always be calm, consistent, brief, immediate, and respectful. Or we could say, us as adults, we always need to be calm, consistent, brief, immediate, and respectful. And we also want to create a system where we know how we will respond to problem behavior before that problem behavior pops its head up, because it's going to. So we want to decide what the consequences are, or a menu of consequences, before those rules are broken. We know how we're going to respond, and we know how we're going to be consistently respond. A lot of the schools I work with have looked at problem behaviors, they've defined those behaviors, and then they've grouped them, because we know that inappropriate behavior could be a very slight thing, a very minor thing, to a very major thing. And so it's really important how we're defining and categorizing those behaviors. So this is just an example. Level 1 could be junk behavior. That's behavior that does not affect the learning environment of that student or others. Now, it can be very annoying, but we want to respond differently than, say, level 4 illegal behavior. At level 2 minor behaviors, behavior that only affects that student. So what would that look like? And then how should we respond? A level 3 is a major behavior that affects the learning of that student, others, and or the learning environment. And a level 4 illegal behavior, which speaks for itself. Now, a lot of schools that I work with have two. They have minor and major. Maybe they only have 3 at an elementary level, where illegal behavior isn't as apparent. So they have level 1 junk, level 2 minor, level 3 major, and we respond differently based on the intensity of the behavior. And here's an example again from our friends over in Notice. And this is their elementary continuum of consequences. So what they've done is they've looked at minor behavior. At a level 1, there should be a redirection, and then they're giving you the examples. So junk behavior affects students within minimal classroom interference, where at level 2, it interferes a little bit with the learning of others. And then they've given you behavior examples. So if you ever have new staff, which we can always plan on, this is a great way to onboard. So we're all under the same assumptions and we're all reacting in the same way. And then a consequence menu. The other thing is, we don't want to take away autonomy from our staff. I know when I was a classroom teacher, if you told me I had to do it exactly like my neighbor teacher, I would have struggled. But here we're keeping consistency by providing options. So if it's a level 1, here's some options of how you could respond. If it's a level 2, here are some options. And then it also lists how are we tracking that, which will be our next section. And then they've taken that and they put it into kind of a decision-making flow chart. So it gives adults questions to ask themselves and guidance on how to respond. And all of this is in the PowerPoint. And if you ever have questions, feel free to email me if you'd like some of these kind of extracted from the PowerPoint as well. All right, let's get into our sixth component of the school-wide approach. That's utilizing data for decision making. So here's why. We make better decisions when we use data. Now, mind you, that's valid and reliable data. So data that actually is mirroring what is happening within your schools. When we have that data, we're able to respond consistently to problem behavior. We're able to monitor patterns of problem behavior. We're able to identify context. So maybe it's a location, maybe the issue is just happening within a grade level or during this time of day. And then we can add more support as needed. It also helps us to understand why problem behaviors continue. So what is the perceived motivation or function of the behavior? And then we're getting a reduction in referral disproportionality by race, ethnicity, disability, gender, and other characteristics because we're able to see a clear reflection of our system. Here are the key features of an effective data system. We need data that are accurate, that are easy to collect. So if you're asking me to fill out, a 4-page form, it's probably not going to happen. I'm probably going to go on with my day and keep things rolling. How can we make it super user-friendly? How can we collect data so it's actually used for decision-making, not just collected to be collected? How can we also make sure that information is available when we need to make decisions? And then keep in mind within your system, if you're asking people to collect data, they need to know what that data stands for. What does that mean at the end of the day? So sharing it back with those who collect it. Some other key points of your data system. We're really good at this, I feel like, on the academic side, but we struggle sometimes on the behavioral side. Remember, data helps us to ask the right questions. It doesn't provide the answers. We use data to identify and refine problems, define the questions that lead to solution. Data helps place the problem in a context rather than upon students. And one key takeaway, if you're using some kind of a reporting form, a write-up form, typically we call these office discipline referral forms, an ODR form, that's not the consequence. So I could walk into any school, anywhere, and hear, you better knock that off or you're going to get written up. That should not be the consequence. Keep in mind your office discipline referral form, that's your data tracking device, so we know what's going on campus. And then we really want to make sure that information that we're collecting, we're getting some key pieces. So we want to be able to, with that information we're collecting, answer the big 5 questions. 1, how often are problem behavior events occurring? Where are they happening? What types of problem behaviors? When are they occurring? And who is contributing? So think about your data system. Are you able to answer these questions? All right, so that kind of covers this school-wide approach to supporting students and preventing problem behavior. And we've gone through those 6 elements. There they are. And just to kind of loop back full circle, we explored these elements, and they include school-wide leadership teams, school-wide behavioral expectations, teaching those behavioral expectations, acknowledging positive behaviors. Our responses need to be consistent and predictable, and we need to utilize data for decision-making. So that was a whole lot of information, but I'd like to just open it up for any questions or comments.
Wonderful. Katie, thank you so much. So if anyone, you're welcome to unmute and ask those questions or make comments, or you can use the chat as well. Great. Noreen, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Katie. That was fantastic. I had a question about when a school is implementing this, what is sent home to the parents in terms of educating them about the program?
I think that is a huge question, Noreen. And I think transparency is always key. And, even beyond the parents. So how are we getting this information out? The most successful schools I've worked with really are intentional with messaging. So how are we getting information out with student handbooks? How is it listed on our website? Back to school nights when, parents are coming in, parent teacher conferences. How is this always available? And how are we informing everyone? It makes it much easier too when it's system dependent, not person dependent. So this is the way we do business at our school. I hope that answers that, Noreen.
It does. I think schools have systems similar to this, but sometimes it's just a handout that goes home that I sign for my kids, and that's it. And I don't know if that there needs to be more, or if there's any data around, should there be more.
I definitely think there should be more. Another really fun tool to use is videos. So a lot of our schools create videos around their school-wide expectations and their routines and procedures. And those are great for students. Those are great for teaching staff to use as, reteaching tools, but they're also great to put on your website. So they're open to the public to see.
Take it, Greg.
Yeah, as a superintendent, I've seen a lot of schools, doing these programs and so forth. But, one of the ways to get the parents to look at that and review it often with their children at home is make it a little magnet for the refrigerator, just that can be assignment once a week is with parents. Please, talk to your kids about respect, those different things. So you just got to keep it in front of the parents almost at least on a weekly basis to really make the program work well.
I want to mention a strategy that I've seen as far as like looping in the parents, Greg, and some of those tickets, like I mentioned, the I Spy tickets. We had a very innovative group this last year, and they created tickets. And I know I've seen this in the Boise School District, but tickets where we're filling out real quick. Thank you for meeting this expectation. Who's receiving it? Who gave the ticket? And then there's a sticker on it. And this is more of an elementary example. And then that sticker goes on the shirt. And now it's a conversation starter. So other adults can say, hey, Greg, how did you get that sticker? Tell me about it. But we've seen it be a really nice bridge home, because when they get home with the sticker, there can be a continued conversation around it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to you, Shelley, and then Casey.
Awesome job, Katie, as always. Really, really good information, especially to start the school year off with all of these things. And so I really appreciate how you outlined that this is a systems approach, yet we can still have autonomy within it. But my question for you is, and I don't want to say teachers have resistance or staff have resistance, because I think sometimes we're implementing these things and we're told how to do it, yet we're told that we can do it our way, but then we're told we should do it a different way. What advice would you give to somebody who is maybe going through that kind of mindset?
Yeah. And I mean, it's one more thing, right? Like, how many more things can you add to our plate? I always like to start with, what is the compelling why? Why are we doing this? If it's not worth, I borrow this from Dr. Horner, if it's not worth doing for 10 years, don't even start it. Okay. And we don't use that rule very well in education systems. But another thing to think about, if you're really trying to make this a school-wide approach within your organization, you need 80% of your staff. You're never going to get 100% of your staff. Some of the staff members they're not, in the same space as you. But if you can get 80% of your staff on board, aligned and consistent, then you can really start implementing this with some fidelity.
I echo the feelings of everybody that said, Katie, that was tremendous. Just a really, really good insight and presentation. And I think a great way to kick off the series this year. Speaking to Greg's point a little bit, I think that there's a lot to that, Greg. I actually really appreciated that thought of consistency, not only in the classroom, but also extenuating into the home, because you think about the tenets of martial arts, and a lot of times kids who participate in Taekwondo or other forms of martial art, they're taught tenets of respect and responsibility. And that's reiterated every class period. And so they're learning that 1, 2, 3 times a week. And I think there's a lot to that. They become pretty married to those ideas as they hear them repeated in their environment over and over and over again. So I do love this idea of trying to perpetuate it beyond the classroom and beyond the school setting, which Katie, I think, emphasized a lot about and hearing it in various aspects of school and home. And so I just kind of wanted to, I guess, reinforce that idea. No specific question.
Katie, I had a question. You were talking about data, and I wonder what that looks like in terms of any recommendations you have for evaluating the data, updating the plan approach, like in terms of a timeline or that process.
Well, we're all a part of a system where we have to submit data to usually the state and to the feds. And that data isn't always data that informs our decisions. So we really want to think back to those big five. What are we able to collect to answer those questions? So our data collection systems should start with our questions we want to answer and build it from there. Several, Power School, all these different corporations that we're utilizing their platforms will help us do that. I'm a huge advocate of SWIS, SWIS, Schoolwide Information System, because it's the easiest. It was built by our PBIS gurus at the University of Oregon, and it's built for behavioral data collection to be used at the school level for decision making, and it's really inexpensive. And the beauty of this is they have it at the school-wide level. So what are we doing at tier 1? And then they have a system for Swiss check-in, check-out. What are we doing for small groups at tier 2? And then iSwiss at tier 3. So it's really built for that entire pyramid, not just that bottom foundation.
Did you have another question or comment, Craig?
Yeah, I just saw the comment about the postcards sent home, and boy, we did that one time as well. I challenged the teachers to send, at least 1 or 2 postcards to every parent to talk about something that their child did well. And it, we actually even, put the address on and everything. So all that teacher had to do is write 1 comment. And you can't believe how the parents start buying into programs at your school once you do that. And every kid you can write a comment. I mean, I saw comments like, "Hey, I was just happy to see you, your Billy came to school on time today. We were so excited to see him." Boom. That went on to that parent's refrigerator. The parents started buying into it. So those things, looking at the positives, and that's kind of what a school-wide program does as well, is looks at the positives of students so you don't have to deal with the negatives. And so I just saw that and I go, yay, good. Postcards, great thing. Cheap too.
Yeah, it looks like a number of people are using postcards or similar techniques.
And that's a great example of a systems approach, because without those postcards, you won't necessarily be looking for, students' great attributes or what they're doing well. So, setting up that system. And then if we go back to the importance of relationships, parent to staff relationships was one of those key 4, and that really helps build that as well.
I think it also models, I feel like so many treatment interventions and family interventions, parent-child, one of the main tenets echoes what you talked about today, Katie, which is like catch them being good and, trying to like talk about the behavior you want to see. And I think part of why that's such a key part of so many interventions is it's really hard to do, unfortunately. Like just as humans, we might be more reactive and kind of more tuned in to don't do that, stop, stop, stop kind of thing. And so it's just like this, I love all those little layered approaches to catching them being good, modeling praise, adults kind of having the surprise and sharing it, but it's just really cool. I would love, as this series continues, to hear more about what people are trying, because I think again, so often there's sort of this tendency to focus on the problems and what's not going well. And it's just wonderful when you hear about how to flip that around, and not just say to do it, but have actual strategies.
Yeah, and also how are we acknowledging staff and colleagues? Again, that's that other element of staff to staff relationships.
I've seen some schools use those cards where the students can fill them out for the staff and the teachers, and that makes a huge difference. That's that full positive circle, right?